We're official. All right, welcome everybody to the in-person meeting of our Transportation Coordinating Committee. This is the December edition of the TCC. We have provided a hybrid or an online option for those not able to be here today. For our online participants, we would ask you please communicate via the chat. Due to the meeting and where we have microphones, you may only hear the presenters clearly due to the acoustics in the room as well. Staff will attempt to type questions from the room into the chat to help facilitate the online participation. And I will note that voting, we are voting in-person attendees only. I will note that the GNRC staff did send a proxy form out, so would encourage any member agencies not here, not able to be here, to fill that out, complete that to ensure we have a monthly quorum moving forward. We do have a quorum today, speaking of which, so we will be voting on our items today. And so first item on the agenda, we have approval of the November meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to endorse the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second, motion and a second. Are there any corrections or notes on the minutes? Seeing none, ask for or I'd like to vote for all in favor of the minutes. Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Now we'll move to our public comment portion of the agenda. This time, I'll open the floor to any member of the public wishing to make a comment to the TCC. Please note that the comments may also be emailed to comments@gnrc.org. Seeing no one moving to the podium, we will move on to our action item of the agenda. To get us started on, we have two action items this morning. Get started on that. The first of the two, I'd like to introduce Sean Falls.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just stay here for the update. So the first one that we have is the proposed amendments to the Regional Transportation Plan. At last month's meeting, we gave an initial preview of the need and kind of the impetus behind the updates to the RTP from some of our project sponsors, and had an opportunity to collect information on some of those requests. And so we'll go through all of those requested changes with you today in detail. Just kind of a background, amendments to the RTP are definitely not as frequent as they are to the Transportation Improvement Program. We adopted our Regional Transportation Plan in February of 2021, and some of the triggers for an amendment we have listed here, which would include addition of projects that add capacity to the system, motorized capacity in particular, that were not included in the adopted RTP, the addition of projects whose federal share of funding is not accounted for in that adopted RTP. And those two are what is triggering the proposed amendments that we'll present to you today. Also, any changes to the financial plan or any changes requiring a regional air quality conformity determination, which is not currently applicable to this region. One other item that just to highlight is at the Transportation Policy Board meeting, when we went through some of these proposed RTP amendments, the discussion or some questions came up about what is a regionally significant project, because we've noted the need for regionally significant projects, even if federal funding is not identified, to be included in the TIP and the RTP. And so just have this definition, generally facilities serving a regional transportation need, access to and from areas outside the region, major activity centers, major planned developments, and just in general, we're looking at the principal arterial roadway network within the region, kind of at a minimum, facilities that meet that or are above that threshold. And so we'll go through the four proposed amendments. Two are new project additions to the RTP, and then two would be identification or shifts in funding for projects that were identified on the illustrative list, but now funding has been identified coming from the local level. And so just to start, the first one is the from Metro Nashville, request to add the East Bank Spine North-South Arterial Boulevard. This would be a development of a multimodal corridor using some existing road segments and some new road segments from Jefferson Street to Spring Street, from the Jefferson Spring Street area to I-65 and Korean Vets Boulevard. This would be on the East Bank side by the stadium. The total estimated cost of this project is $150 million, and we would be adding this project to the RTP and identifying funding that from the state in the form of the local Interstate collector program, as well as funding locally. And so Anna will go into detail about the amount that is coming immediately in the form of state and local funding for the initial phases of work, but that funding being programmed, and then the local funding covering the remaining cost of that total project cost. Next, we have projects from the city of Mount Juliet. There's three. One is a addition of a new project, the Pleasant Grove widening from Old Pleasant Grove Road to Central Pike, State Route 265. This is the widening from 2 to 4 lanes with a median divided roadway that would include multimodal features and possible realignment of the roadway in anticipation of a future interchange at I-40 and Central Pike. And so this total project cost is $20 million, and the request is to add this project, and with the funding being identified as local funds coming from Mount Juliet. The next project, also from Mount Juliet, is East Division Street widening from North Mount Juliet Road, State Route 171, to Golden Bear Parkway. This is also a widening project from 2 to 4 lanes with a median divided roadway. This would also include multimodal features as well as roadway shoulders and traversable side slopes. And the total cost of this project is $25 million. It was identified on the regional transportation plan as an illustrative project because funding wasn't secured. But the city has identified local funding to advance this project, and so be moving it from the illustrative list to the fiscally constrained list with local funding, local funding being the source of funding identified. And then lastly, also Mount Juliet project for Eastern Connector Phase 2. This would be the widening of the Golden Bear Gateway from 2 to 4 lanes, also a divided roadway from Cedar Creek to north of Curd Road. This project will also include multimodal features. Total cost of this project is $15 million, similar to the East Division Street. This project was identified in the regional transportation plan, but did not secure funding. And so we'd be shifting the project from the illustrative list to the fiscally constrained list with local funding identified as a source. So those are covering the updates. We are currently in the public review and comment period that will extend through December 15th. And then this will be, in addition to being presented to you all today, we're looking for your endorsement of the proposed amendments to be considered by the Transportation Policy Board. And so we can take any questions. And I know that one item that came up during the Transportation Policy Board meeting was questions regarding TDOT's local interstate collector program and some of the thresholds or funding caps associated with that program. And so, Jonathan, if you wanted to provide an update or some clarity from TDOT on that, I think we'd appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I know Metro has never presented to this board on their kind of work development side. They did last month present to the policy board, and there were some questions. Since 1965, TDOT has had the local interstate connector program. Some of you have utilized that. Franklin used it, Girls used it. what it is, it's a 50/50 call share. If you're looking at adding that kind of a spine route from the interstate to the local road, TDOT will provide up to 50% matching funds. In that state law in 1965, it did not put a number. It just said TDOT matched up to 50% if the route qualifies. Now, if you look on our website, under our local programs office, it does say there's a cap of $4 million, which therefore TDOT would pay $2 million. Historically, if we looked it up, anyone who's applied for a local interstate connector and was eligible was funded for that. It's completely safe. So there was a question, as Sean alluded to, at the policy board about, well, Metro asked for $50 million, and TDOT's going to give you $25 million. Why are you doing that? That's over the $4 million cap. Well, the cap, again, is unofficial. They all said it's 50%. So TDOT felt with the development to bring in over 8,000 jobs, $1 billion investment, that it was eligible. So nothing that TDOT did at all. We just felt like, again, we had never turned down a project that was eligible. So there have been past instances where TDOT has done over the $4 million. So just wanted to make that clear. Pot, so to speak, there's no official pot for LIC funds. Just if you come to us, the eligible interstate connector project, in this case, a very valid one, and it can't be over. So, any questions on that? Okay.
Figuring the interchanges on in this order,
This would be a local street. After construction, it would be straight to Metro. So it would not be.
then I know this reconstructed interchanges on that 24.
Well, there are some studies underway. I don't remember the study, but it's part of the approve that. Could they be reconstructed? Yes. Is it part of this project? Not necessarily. No. But changes could happen. Absolutely. But it's not part of this project. Right?
So, one question, Franklin, and I know Jonathan brought this up. One of his concerns that he voiced to me was to make sure that, and it sounds like it is, that if any of the other communities have the opportunity to significant investment in their region, that you would then consider above that $4 million cap. My understanding is we have been capped before at the $4 million, and there may be good reason for that as to why that happened. But for the rest of the communities here, we're not saying it's a bad investment on TDOT. I'm just saying we will have that same consideration as we apply for that above that $4 million.
Yeah, and to keep in mind, the general rule of thumb, it is $4 million. But, and the answer to your question is yes. We actually did some research. There's been a Rutherford County project that was over the $4 million cap for the Interstate Connector program. So it's not unprecedented that we've gone over the $4 million. So absolutely. But in this case, again, the largest investment in jobs in our state history, over $1 billion. We do feel like that was a good use of the fund. But to answer your question, Franklin, absolutely. I mean, it's not $4 million for everyone else. $50 million for TDOT. I mean, for Metro. That's not the case. So
I'm asking for everybody.
absolutely, yes, asking for everyone. Sure, but your average project, the average community without the LIC program is probably going to say $1. Again, not to say never go over that. Absolutely.
The other concern voiced by Jonathan to me to articulate today is there any chance that this pulls away from our priorities?
Absolutely. I had a conversation yesterday with our executive director about this. Absolutely not. It's not hurt any other person sitting in campus of getting plus interstate connector funds, nor does it affect any other TDOT project.
I guess the last thing is how there was questions about how this is being coordinated with that inner loop around Nashville, which obviously impacts the greater region, especially I-24, I-65, the congestion that we have there. Is that all being coordinated? How is that being coordinated? There's confusion that it hasn't been presented to this group prior to going to the Transportation Policy Board first.
What has not been presented?
this East Bank Spine project.
Well, that's a question for the TO.
I know that was of a concern, how that's all being coordinated, the fact that it went there first. I think that was a matter of timing, is the way it understood us, but we felt it was important for it to come here because it does affect that particular region, and curious about how it's being coordinated with it.
And just to confirm, TDOT shared that with
Just to clarify, are you referring to the effort that Jonathan mentioned of TDOT study of the interloop?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought you were referring to the presentation, not on the, correct?
Well, both, how are the two being coordinated? Question. How are they being coordinated is what we're trying to understand.
Sure. So there's a lot of studies going on right now. Of course, TDOT just completed the Middle Tennessee Congestion Action Plan, which was a study of various projects across the Middle Tennessee region, specifically Nashville. Also, there's, of course, in the IMPROVE Act, there was some very large projects done on the interloop, which is currently being studied. Metro is performing some of that. TDOT is performing some of that as well. So it is being coordinated, absolutely.
And I think, just to touch on that, in addition to those efforts that are underway, there's also the East Bank study that's underway. And so maybe at an upcoming meeting, we get a presentation when it's in, when those are both in a appropriate place to share on both of those efforts and how, you know, they are leveraging one another.
Okay. Good discussion, everyone. Thank you, Sean, for the presentation on the items there. Any other questions, Bill?
Yeah, the other projects on the list on here, I know they're not, they're on the list. Identified as, state local funding. And I know in the CIP, they are, but, construction phase. Is it the intent to come back later to fund the construction phase, federal dollars?
I'll go ahead and answer those. They're City Mount Juliet projects. So, for now, the discussion is ongoing with our elected officials as far as how we're gonna fund them. I think the intent is that we're gonna be pushing forward as fast as we can. I'd say one or potentially all could be local funds. We took one of the things I'll say out of our project delivery task force, and one of the things that Sean mentioned was regionally significant projects. And so we took that to heart, and we knew we had these projects coming along that we're pushing forward with our local funds. And, you know, there's the potential, I would say, Pleasant Grove is probably a candidate for LIC, you know, having that discussion right now. East Division, probably not. Eastern Connector, no. But, you know, there's potential. We would pursue that at some point in time if there was funds available, but our intent right now is to push forward with these with just local funds.
The main reason I'm asking is I'm wondering if the next update of the long-range plan, this level of commitment at the local level, is that going to ensure or incentivize including construction elements of these projects in the next long-range plan update ahead of some of the other illustrative projects?
Are you talking about with local funds? For
No,
us, or just?
having
Yeah, you may.
projects that are not now in the long-range plan, or at least don't be part of it. Qualifying those or essentially identifying those already in the hopper, if you will, to be included in the next long-range plan update. Because as we saw last time, there's more projects, there's money, and projects are more expensive, so we have less projects. So 4 years or whatever it is, we update the long-range plan again. Are these gonna be at the top of the list? From moving from the electric stuff to the cost feasible?
Yeah,
It's a good strategy if that's what it is.
Not the intent, I'll say from our side.
So, I mean, I think there's probably like two parts to this conversation. There's I mean, it will already be included in the long-range plan by virtue of being amended in here, of course. And also in the TIP, because they're, candidates in our TIP amendment package here. When we are evaluating projects for the TIP, and we're looking at projects that don't currently have any federal funding allocated or awarded to them, we do, when we are evaluating projects for the TIP, give a bump to projects that are already in the TIP and already programmed with federal funds, because we've committed to those projects at a high level and we want to see them through. We would be mindful with these projects to not unfairly give them a bump in TIP development just because they're in the TIP but don't have federal funds committed to them yet. Does that make sense? I mean, we do like to see local commitment towards projects, and that's always a positive in our eyes, but we would not give these projects an extra scoring bump since they don't already have federal funds associated with them, in the same way we would a project that we've already committed federal funding to. And if you need me to further clarify, I'm happy to.
One other thing that I'll mention, Bill, too, and we'll get into this in the TIP update discussion, is just the dynamic of, projects that are, evaluate well and have been included in our documents, and then also the readiness factor. So, Andy has indicated that locally they're committed to these projects and they're advancing them forward. And so as we update the TIP, we'll be looking and moving from RTP into TIP as the implementation. So looking at projects that are ready and can utilize the money that is programmed. And so one of the challenges that we'll talk about is we have had an unobligated balance that has built up over time because of a lack of projects that are ready to access that money that is programmed. And so it's one of the things that we'll be grappling with over the coming development cycle of trying to align projects that we want to do and priorities in the region with how well they are prepared to access that money moving forward.
Speaking of the system on Division Street, that is somewhat a legacy project that I've been working on sporadically since I became the planner in Wilson County. What happened as time has went on, jurisdictional boundaries have changed and expanded out. Most of it is in Mount Juliet and or Lebanon jurisdiction at this point. But I will say that specifically that project is important locally because it's a safety issue. It's got really deep shoulders, and what I mean are steep shoulders that don't have a lot of perspective, I guess, shoulder. With a few places only having guardrails and stuff, it is a safety issue. There's a lot of bikers on it. Almost at one time, almost every bus for the public school systems in Wilson County that circulates west of 109 to the schools west of 109, almost every bus spends some time on Division Street, either in the morning or after both, because it was the parallel and alternate route that was getting on I-40 in an effort to try to avoid both the high-speed traffic and the potential for accidents at high speed. Most of the buses traverse Division Street and still do, to my knowledge. So that may be something you don't want to pursue, too, is if there are any safety pods that might assist funding on that project. Still just the width of the old railroad bed now?
Pretty much. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Seeing no more, I'll ask for a motion to endorse these amendments to the RTP for consideration. Thank you. Second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or amendments? All in favor of the proposed amendments, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. On to item 3B. This is also a voting item for us. I'd like to introduce, I believe, Anna Emerson is going to be taking this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the first cycle of amendments for the new fiscal year 2022 that we are now currently in, the new federal fiscal year. This group, of course, I think everyone will probably remember going through all 21 of these at our last meeting together. I won't go through these one by one again at this meeting, but I do have a couple of things I want to note before I'm happy to take any questions on these. One is that for the WeGo project and amendment number 2022-008, there was an incorrect description for the project, and when we met at our last meeting in the previous packet, so that has been updated to make sure we're capturing the right description. Of course, I'll note again that the 4 projects that were candidates for RTC amendments that we just reviewed together are all also proposed amendments in this slate of amendments. The 3 projects from Mount Juliet and the project for Metro Nashville, the East Bank Line. I know we just had a fair amount of discussion about that. It's amendment number 2022-020. You'll see the $50 million, 50% state, 50% local, that's being proposed to be added to the tip for that project. And if anybody has any remaining questions on any of the projects we've discussed already or anything else that's included in this amendment packet, I'm more than happy to go over those.
Thank you, Anna. Any questions on this item? Okay. Yes, Bill?
Big data tools that you are on that.
Well, it's, Sean, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So in the COVID relief call for projects that we had set aside a portion of that funding for purchase of big data tools or software subscription. And so we haven't committed to a particular entity. You guys saw the demonstration from Streetlight Data, which is one vendor that's out there. I think that was at our September meeting, I believe. And there's a couple of others out there, but we still have to go through the process of selection of that vendor. But this sets aside the funding to be able to embark on subscription or data for multiple years.
And be something that local government will tap into, modeling.
Yeah, that would be the idea. I think there was a couple of examples through that Streetlight demonstration of questions that you could be able to answer at the local level with access to some of the origin destination information that they have available. I think one of the examples that they showed was the Greenway system up in Gallatin, Sumner County, and kind of where those trips were, where those users are coming from. And so I think that's the idea, is to be able to use the purchaser for our region to be able to utilize that information to answer some of the questions that come up at the local level.
That's a good question. No, I'm excited about that potential from a local standpoint.
Hopefully everybody remembers that when we discussed the proposed awards that we made for all the COVID relief funds. All those project awards, of course, are also contained in this amendment package. All the local awards that we made for the relief funds that were received by our planning area.
Any further questions on this item?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Your second? Motion and a second. Any further amendments, changes? Seeing none, all in favor of these proposed amendments, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Okay, now we'll move to the informational item portion of our agenda. For this, I'll turn it back to Sean.
Great, thank you. So this next item is going to be an ongoing item over the next year as we update the Transportation Improvement Program. We have an update on the federal fiscal years 2023 to 2026 TIP, which will be our next horizon for our TIP. And just want to focus today on some of the updates and project information that we have for existing TIP projects that will likely need to be carried over and considered for the next TIP horizon. Just to cover some of the objectives, I know we talked about some of the key steps within the process at the last meeting, but just to identify some of those objectives and also opportunities as we embark on this effort over the next year is really identifying some of those TIP projects that are inactive or have fallen behind schedule. As I was mentioning to Bill, this the programming needs is something that staff will be grappling with. We have available funding, we have project requests, some existing, some new, and being able to ensure that we are programming the money to those projects when they need it, in order to ensure that we're advancing projects through the development process and seeing them to completion. Also looking to compile, accurate cost estimates, realistic schedules, and that all helps to inform better programming from staff's perspective and to support that timely obligation of funding. I think some of the opportunities as we, are trying to complete those or achieve those objectives, exploring some opportunities to resolve some of these known challenges in the project development process. We touched on what some of those common challenges that we see and we've heard from you on, and trying to figure out what are some opportunities to address those, whether with tools or policy changes, and then testing those out through this development process is, what are some of those strategies that we can employ to address this buildup of unobligated balances that has been occurring. And so, as we mentioned, these key inputs in the development process. Today, we'll focus on this first one, which is compiling project funding requests. And so, before we embark on identifying any new funding requests, we want to spend some time with you and drill into some of those existing commitments and identify some of those project status, the existing project status updates, and some of those changes since the last time we updated the TIP. And so one of the tools that we've developed to help with that process, there's obviously the TIP interactive database that's available, but I think that taking some of that information and then distilling it into what we've called this project tracker, I think helps to not only staff, but you all in order to identify the projects that you have within your community, funding that's allocated to them, where the programming is currently identified, and how they're doing in terms of obligating that money, or if there needs to be some updates to either the funding, project status, or the anticipated schedule of that project. And so in your packet, you have a overview page that identifies a lot of the fields that are in there and defines what's captured within that field. And then your tracker, which is 11 by 17, contains a number of these fields: lead agency, project name, the improvement type, the project IDs, not only the TIP ID that you can use to search in the database, but also the PIN number that you use as you go through the TDOT project development process. We have the total cost, the project status, as well as the amount that's programmed, what percentage of the total cost is programmed, and then some of the key programming policies that we use, whether the match has been secured at the local level, and if it's past due, and if the obligation that has been programmed within the TIP is past due. So if the design funding was supposed to be obligated last year and it has not been, this is where you see that flagged in red. And then the obligation percentage, I think this one is helpful in identifying how much of that funding that's been programmed to the project has actually been obligated in the TIP. And so you'll see, you know, we want to be working on trying to get some of those obligations to a higher percentage than what's on this tracker now. Also have the phases of work identified, that phases of work of the project that are programmed within the TIP, and then the construction year, if construction funding is programmed within the TIP. And so this list is sorted by project status from, you know, construction on down to not yet started, or what we've flagged as candidate project. And then it's also sorted by lead agency, so you can see, you know, all of the projects for Franklin or Gallatin or Goodlettsville. And so we're open to feedback on this document, but we think that, you know, this in tandem with the TIP Interactive database, that both of those tools can be really helpful in identifying what's been, you know, identified for status or funding for projects now. And as we look into updating the TIP, you know, what of these project details needs to change, whether it be cost, schedule, and then that'll inform the programming on our end. So if you go to the next slide, obviously this is the TIP Interactive database. Oh, sorry.
I noticed there are no transit projects.
Right.
I know those may be a little different sometimes, and
Right.
How are you looking at taking those into consideration?
Yeah, that's a good point. The focus has primarily been on the highway projects, given the unobligated balance is largely pinned on a lot of these roadway or bicycle and pedestrian projects. And so I think we can still find a way to capture the transit projects, and maybe we can work with you on the best way to do that. As we've looked through these highway projects, a lot of it has been multiple phases of work and trying to track those through TDOT's process and, you know, identify where there might be challenges, whether it be in NEPA or design or right-of-way. Some of those challenges, it's a different process on the transit side, and you're not necessarily going through local programs and countering some of those challenges. But I think in order of just tracking, obligating the money, we can find a way to incorporate that. And it's going to be a little bit of comparing apples to oranges, but I think it is important. It's been less of an issue than with the highway projects, and so we've kind of focused initially on these highway projects first, highway funded projects.
So I understand. So if there's any way we can just, you know, we can work with you and Franklin Granted over.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Is this supposed to be all the projects or just one?
So this should capture most of the highway projects on the TIP. As Felix mentioned, you're going to not see a lot of the transit projects that you'll see within the interactive database, but some of these I would say don't need updates. Like, I think there might be a couple of Mount Juliet projects that are complete at this point, and so we're showcasing that information just for comprehensiveness, but we are not needing, you know, updates on those projects. I think the focus would be on projects that are, you know, where construction hasn't been obligated. You know, there's still phases to be programmed, funding to be programmed, and money to be obligated. So I guess that right of way through design, NEPA, or if the project hasn't even started NEPA yet. Go to the next slide. I'll take you through a couple of overview slides. I think that are some good key takeaways of what's captured within this list, and, you know, just get a sense of some of the noteworthy trends. So if we look at these projects, and this is primarily the highway projects, just by years programmed, I think one thing that stands out is a third of these projects have been programmed in the TIP for 5 or more years. And so, with the TIP only having a 4-year horizon, we're seeing, projects taking longer to progress through, the development process and being carried over multiple TIPs. This is something that we'd like the time frame to be shorter rather than longer. And so as we go through and review some of these projects that are on the list, identifying projects that are no longer a priority or projects that might be a lower priority than other projects, so that we can, update the programming information accordingly. Tom?
Well, I guess my question is, how much are we hamstrung by federal requirements? Can the TIP be extended to a 4 or 5 year TIP as opposed to 3?
We could, extend to a 5-year, but I think FHWA is only going to recognize 4. Is that correct, Sean?
Yeah, so the TIP is required to cover a period of 4 years. Any years beyond that, we consider informational. We'll still accept it and consider it part of the TIP, but we don't take any approval action or have any approval authority over anything.
My feeling, being a long-standing member of this board, is that we're kind of like the House of Representatives. We're always running for re-election. I wonder if we would be better off having a longer TIP cycle for amendment, or revision, instead of just constantly having to go back and relook at the TIP, relook at the TIP, relook at the TIP. And if we're hamstrung by federal requirements, it has to be, no more than 4 years, so be it. But I think that's a discussion that probably needs to go up the food chain to FHWA and FDA and all the other federal agencies. It just takes a long time to get some of these projects from start to finish, particularly when you're dealing with the state agency, DOT, getting those projects done. I had a lighting project that took over 20 years. So, I don't know that, I feel sometimes like we're spinning our wheels because we're constantly going back and looking at it over and over and over again. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know that we've been having the project delivery task force meetings that have, a lot of these issues have come up, and I think one that
Taking nothing away from trying to get projects that have been on there and stale for a long time without any input from the locals or anything. I get that, but on the flip side, these projects take a long time, particularly if they're, like the spine road that Metro has. That's a big project. So you can't, imagine that they'll be able to get that done in a 3 or 4 year timeframe from conceptual to design to NEPA to right-of-way acquisition, if there is any, to final construction. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Would it help to limit phases in each TIP? So that we include all of the phases in one TIP and just focus on NEPA and design in the 4-year, and the next TIP tackle construction for right-of-way? That helps. It would certainly reduce a long list.
To that point, Bill, I know, Jonathan can probably speak to this a little bit. I know for TDOT, you look at the 3-year work program, which is kind of their, well, you have you have your own, STIP, but, the work program is where the money meets the road, literally. And, the funding is only there, so they're only allocating the money for that right there. And the rest of it is more, I guess, as we would say, illustrative. Understanding, I know there's probably a fiscal constraint that we've got to look at here, but the other aspect of it is saying, okay, well, we know, hey, right away on this job is going to take 3 years. You're probably looking at just having a right of way and a tip for a lot of projects that are going to have any significant amount of right of way. So for that point, obviously, I think the staff would certainly want to know the total funding of the project to be looking to be fiscally constrained. Then from a tip standpoint, I think if we're only saying, hey, we got a success, we've got NEPA and TIP, and we know we can get that within this TIP. Those are really attainable goals. That way, the construction money, I mean, hey, we're all optimistic. We'd love to see construction hit it, go from NEPA to construction in a 4-year time frame when you got right of way, but that's not gonna happen. I think we're all very optimistic on that, and that's probably elongates the time frame on a lot of these.
It would also, maybe not, but it would also supporting a lot of money on some.
Yeah, and I think this topic has come up at the project delivery where local governments want assurance that when they need the construction funding, that it's going to be available, but that might not be within the TIP window. And so that might be one of those strategies or opportunities where we find a way. We've utilized the construction reserve pot of funding in the past, so kind of first come, first serve. When that project needs the construction funding, it's available, and we can find opportunities where, you know, if you only need the NEPA and design funding in the phase of the TIP, then, you know, maybe we account for that money outside of the TIP horizon and remain committed to it, but it doesn't kind of just fall off the radar and, you know, concern the local agencies. So I think that there's some opportunities. We've also, you know, just kind of having exposure to how other states kind of manage their TIP process. There's other states out there that don't program anything but construction funding towards projects, which is, you know, dramatically different than what we do now. But that's another way of, you know, a lot of the project development process occurring before the TIP. And so when you come to the TIP, then you're ready to go for construction, and it's a little bit easier to
do it that way, the entire NEPA process, everything on a local time.
That's the way that it is in a lot of other places where the local agencies are paying for those other phases of work, and then potentially getting support from the state when they go to construction, support of matching funds or local funds. So there's a couple of different ways out there, and I think these are all things that you know, we can work with the task force and identify some recommendations of other ways that we could be programming the funding.
New here, alternate, I've dealt with a lot of these projects, but I really just want to say, I like the idea of just including each phase that's needed in that TIP. It just makes it realistic, achievable, which is what the goal should be.
Okay, if you go to the next slide, Daniel. Just a couple other slides. So just looking at projects by total cost. One thing that stands out is there's a lot of lower cost projects. About 60% of projects are 5 million or below. And those projects that are lower cost still have to go through the same development process as those projects that are $20 million or more. And so just adds another layer of complexity where greater number of projects to get through the process. You know, if an agency has multiple lower cost projects to work through with local programs at the same time, or, you know, advance through their local planning processes, just adds another layer of complexity.
Other states have minimum project size or anything like that? Y'all seen that?
I don't know if we've seen a minimum project size, but I think just from, you know, experience in Massachusetts, hardly came across a project that was less than $1 million. Things may have been, you know, a higher cost there, but there is and we've had this discussion, I think, with locals, if not with all of you, of kind of when you embark on the federal process and complying with a lot of those requirements, that it can be time consuming. And so there is, you know, Anna or I may often persuade you for a lower cost project that if the local funds are available, it might be in your best interest to advance those locally. There's some other states that we've encountered where the state has kind of flexed state dollars with MPOs for a lot of these like smaller scale projects at the local level, because the state process has fewer of the requirements associated with them. I think a lot of the requirements are kind of built more towards those higher cost projects, you know, $20 million or more. And so that's one opportunity in order to, you know, maybe identify some cost savings or time savings in going through the requirements. And then I think that also with that last slide too, you'll see that about a quarter of the projects, or nearly a quarter, are more than $20 million as well. And then when we go to the next slide to look at the amount programmed, you tend to see that the funding is available in programs for those lower cost projects, but less likely to be available for those higher cost projects above $5 million. And so I think it's less than 5% of the projects have the amount programmed for that, the higher end of the more than $20 million. So, and I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, you had mentioned the 3-year work program. TDOT has a lot of higher cost projects where initially the construction funding hasn't been identified yet. And so you have, what we have in the TIP is, you know, NEPA and design funding, but it's just a small fraction of what that project will need in terms of overall programming. And then this kind of highlights that, which is about a quarter of the projects have no construction funding identified. A lot of those are pre-back projects. I think probably like two-thirds or so, but there's also some other projects, locally led projects too, that are still seeking construction funding. And then lastly, just to, you know, emphasize where projects currently stand in terms of their status. You know, we're still looking at, I think about 60%, more than 60% of projects are in the early stages of either not yet started, NEPA, still going through the contracting process, have started NEPA or design. And so that's a significant share of projects that are in the TIP. And so, you know, ideally we want to see more projects in right-of-way construction, kind of like moving their way to completion. So I think initially what we're looking for from you is to, you know, review projects on this list. If you can relay any comments to us, you know, either cost updates, scheduling updates. I think a number of those projects that have the flagged yes, either for the programming policy or the construction year is flagged, those would be kind of the first priority to look at and try and address those. If you could get us any comments that you can by Monday, that would be greatly appreciated. Just so that we can then, we're going to have a project delivery task force meeting on Tuesday. And so, you know, any updates that we have, I think would be helpful to, you know, informing that discussion. Obviously, this is not the end of the update process, but just to start getting a sense of, these are key inputs into the programming process and development of the TIP. And so anything that we can get on the radar now will help as we move forward. Happy to take any questions on that.
Questions for Sean? All right. This is an informational item, so there is no action on this, at least voting action. We've got work to do on this. So move on to item 4B. That is annual listing of obligations for current fiscal year. We'll turn this over to Anna.
Thanks so much. All right, switching gears just a little, but not entirely. We're going to take a look at our annual listing of federally obligated projects. This is something that we look at together every year, and it's typically a fairly dry topic, I suppose, but, you know, hoping to make it a little more useful this year, and in the context of our overall project delivery conversation, you know, if we were sort of doing like a planning style study on our project delivery process, we kind of look at this as our, documenting our existing conditions and trends. So, in your meeting packet, you'll find a full report, detailing our annual listing of obligations, has several visuals and facts and figures. You know, we'll walk through just a couple of those as we look at this, but, this is a report that GNRC, as the MPO for our region, is required by federal law, to publish every year within 90 days of the end of the federal fiscal year. This is our record of project delivery, and our progress report also serves as our disclosure to the public on, you know, what we've been working on and the expenditures that we've made. Thank you. Sorry to switch to that slide. So this slide, depicts our federal highway FHWA obligations within our region between fiscal years 2010 and 2021. As you can see, it's kind of steadily risen from around 125 million there in 2010 to nearly 300 million there in 2018, which was a very good year for project delivery in the region. Of course, we had that dip in 2020 as we had the interruption of the pandemic, and things have improved over the course of the last year. And then we'll take a look at the SDA obligations between 2010 and 2021. So these are our transit obligations over the course of the past 10 plus years. It's kind of been a steady obligation amount in between 10 and 30 million there between 2010 and 2019. And then the substantial increase that you see in 2020 and 2021 is a result of the CARES Act funding and American Rescue Plan Act funding that the transit agencies have received as a result of the pandemic resuscitation efforts. And then these are the highway funds that are suballocated to our MPO, to our planning area. And I'll just have you go ahead and flip to this slide is the same as the previous, but also depicts by that dashed line our annual allocation amount that we receive of about $25 million. You know, we've averaged less than $15 million a year in obligations pretty much from 2010 up until present. We hit that high in 2018. I know that, I believe it was Gallatin actually that delivered a really large project in 2018 that really gave our local obligations a boost there. But, you know, the main takeaway here is that we are routinely obligating beneath our annual allocation amount. So we'll move right into the listing of obligations. That's also in your meeting packet. And I'll just briefly go over some of the fields to highlight in this. Of course, we have the date column there is the very first, if you're looking at the larger chart in your packet, that outlines the date the actual obligation occurred. Of course, we also, under the action and phase column, that details what action was taken, what phase of the project was obligated. You can kind of tell whether it was an initial obligation or if it says adjust, maybe some additional funds were obligated for that phase, or maybe even some funds would be obligated for that phase, either because the project was being closed out or because maybe funds were being rolled, unused funds are being rolled from a previous phase onto a next phase. The funding type column, of course, details which type of federal funding was being obligated, federal funds, column details the actual amount of federal funds that were either obligated or de-obligated, depending on the action. And then that total funds in TIP column is just how much there is currently programmed in the TIP on that project. So this is sort of a tool that you can use to provide some more detail and context within our TIP tracker that we just went over, where we have some of these bar graphs that show how much was being obligated. You can sort of use this table to fill in more detail, get a better sense of the picture of what actually occurred there. If you're unsure as you are looking to give us updates on any of your TIP projects, hopefully maybe you can use this as a tool to kind of look back and get some detail on your obligation. I don't think I have much more to say about the report itself. I don't know if anybody has any questions or has anything you want to add. This is just for your information, and hopefully it's something that is useful as well.
Thank you, Anna. Any questions from the committee? Again, this is informational item, so no action required on here. So with that, now we will move into our regular reports section of our agenda. First, we'll move to, we've got Sean Santaya here for the Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So it's kind of funny looking at the minutes for the last meeting. My report was on the uncertainty with the federal funding situation, and that Friday, I think they passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we do have a new bill, five-year bill. FHWA has not yet released any real education materials. We've released some summary fact sheets that are on our website, but we will be putting together a series of fact sheets, education materials on the new programs, changes to existing programs, and we are planning to visit with each MPO committee and board and deliver training and respond to any concerns and get as much information out there as we can. So the administration is referring to the new law as the bipartisan infrastructure law. So if you want to Google FHWA bipartisan infrastructure law, we do have a summary webpage out there on that. And then I will mention we've just issued a request for information in the Federal Register on electric vehicle charging programs. The new bill does have a new formula program and a discretionary program on to deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And we are required to collect and accept comment on how to administer such a program. What should the criteria be for making decisions on that? What do we look for when we're making funding decisions? So again, there's a request for information out there for any comments. So anybody that has any feedback on how best to deploy EV charging infrastructure, we've got a chance out there to provide some feedback to the administration. And then the last item, I think it was last week, US DOT issued our RAISE 2021 awards. This was previously the BUILD program, now the RAISE program. Tennessee's only award recipient that I'm aware of was the city of Cleveland, down outside of Chattanooga, received some money for a planning grant, and this is actually Tennessee's second year in a row that we've had a community receive planning funding out of that program. So it's kind of interesting that we're seeing more of that, but it's unfortunately no awardees here in Middle Tennessee, but just wanted to make everyone aware of that. So,
Thanks, Sean.
All I've got, Andy.
Any questions for Sean? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the TDOT report. Jonathan Russell.
So, any of you all who applied for the multimodal access grant, got word as of yesterday, recommendation was sent to the governor's office. We were told the governor's office requested about 4 weeks to review those. So, we're hoping for Christmas. Also, the CMAQ applications, they've been to the governor's office for 2 weeks. So, we're hopeful if they keep the 4 week time frame, we'll have something back in 2 weeks from now. So, maybe they wait to CMAQ and multimodal at once, but maybe we get CMAQ before Christmas and multimodal first of the year. So, they also, last time I spoke about the urban transportation main grant, UTPG, that's open to any cities, towns, communities county within this, MPO area, up to $200,000 in planning funds. That's due December 30th. So, if that if they've already done so, I think that's about it.
All right. Felix?
What about improve that? Oh, no, I'm
Hot off the press.
Actually, there was emails about that. It was sent to Bill.
No. Or even Billy.
Hot off the press. We have project delivery here. Any questions for Jonathan? All right, seeing none, I believe, Chair's report. I wanted to note, some stuff we've dealt with, a note of kind of what we're all dealing with, in the spirit of thankfulness. We live in an area that's rapidly growing, and with it goes our needs for transportation improvements. And so we in this room, I know we've talked about it today, the federal, state processes that go with them, the laws, how long it takes to bring a project to fruition. I think we understand that. The challenge, however, is that our elected officials often do not. One of the things that's been brought up to my mind very recently is that we have our elected officials generally in 4-year terms. In any grant project that's got any size to it, if they come in on the day one of their term, they're going to be very fortunate to see barrels on that project by the time they end that term. And if it's got any significance to it at all with right-of-way or utilities, they're going to be very fortunate to have that within a 2 4-year term cycle. I know that we covered that in our TIP development process. We had some notes in here of timelines. I've had to present some to our elected officials on that very recently. And I actually last week had one ranting against TDOT. You may have heard about that. I'm saying that videos made the rounds. And it's very unfair, I would note. So we have a very tough job that we have. We have to, in our responsibility, see these projects come to fruition. We also have to be educators as well, with our elected bodies. And so it's a tricky balance, and it's only going to get worse with the growth. But that's the negative of it. I will say this, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I know for me, from the city of Mount Juliet, that one rant does not reflect the vast majority that we have. And, we have a great working body here. In the 7 years I've been in the city of Mount Juliet and participating with this board, as well as also going to the Transportation Policy Board, or whatever it was before, Executive Board, I think. We have a very good spirit of cooperation here. I think this is a real positive that we have. It goes from the local level to the GNRC level, the state level, and the federal level. And so I'm very thankful for that. So in the spirit of Thanksgiving, there's my thankfulness. Note that we've done great work, and I know that we're going to continue to. I'm excited about being part of the Project Delivery Task Force and seeing what will come of that. Great discussion that we have here. This is where the rubber meets the road. And so very thankful for that, and just wanted to give that note there, that while some may have rants and complaints that we hear, I know we all hear from it from the local level, but that's not the spirit of our area, and particularly our member agencies. So anyway, with that, I'll pass it along.
Thank you, Chair. I think last two things I want to mention. One, I have a Project Delivery Task Force meeting on Tuesday. This one will be in City of Franklin, and so we look forward to convening and continuing to dive into a lot of this project information that we've presented to you today, and identifying some of those opportunities as we move forward to address some of the known challenges within the process, and to address the timely obligation of funding. Just to give a couple of highlights of what we've seen so far. Sean had mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law. Some people probably refer to it as the federal infrastructure bill, and I think it's also been identified as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. But just to give you a couple of tidbits that we've seen so far, 1.2 trillion in funding over the next 5 years, and there's funding for other infrastructure besides transportation, but transportation infrastructure is about half of that, so 567 billion. And then kind of a way to think about, of that transportation funding, about half of it is an extension of existing funding that we would have had, just with a, extension of the transportation bill, in the amount of $293 billion. And then also about half of that being newly available funding, so $274 billion, which equates to about $55 billion annually across the nation. And we'll go into the next slide in a second here of how that kind of translates down to the state of Tennessee. But a lot of focus of investments on safety, equity, resiliency, and then we'll touch on some of the new formula-based programs, and then some of the discretionary grant programs that are new and that we'll continue to get more information on in the coming months. But next slide, just this is the funding that comes to the state of Tennessee annually, apportionments. And so going back to 2010, it's about $800 to $900 million annually. And, if we're looking at what the estimated appropriations are going to be over the next 5 years, we're looking at about an additional $1 billion to the state of Tennessee over the next 5 years. Not all of that will be coming to our region, but as a state, that's kind of the scale. And then just some of the changes to some of the formula-based programs that you all are familiar with. What we've done here is just break it down to the average annual amounts. So for not only funding on the infrastructure side, but also funding on planning side. So the two that we're most familiar with is the SCBG and the TAP funding. So that's increasing nationwide from, for SCBG, 11.2 billion to 14.4 billion. TAP going from a little bit less than a billion to about 1.4 billion. And then on the PL side, I think this is just the FHWA PL funds, but a bump in those funds as well from 358 million to 456 million. Some of the new programs in the form of the formula-based, one for Bridge, 5.5 billion annually, EV charging infrastructure, 1 billion annually, the Protect, which is a long name, but captures a lot of resiliency related planning and improvements, 1.4 billion annually, and then a carbon reduction program at 1.3 billion annually. And then some of the existing discretionary grant programs that you're familiar with, the Infra and Build, increases in both of those from 1 billion annually to 1.5. And then some of the new programs, this is not all of them, but just a sampling, include a Safe Streets program, an EV charging stations program, congestion relief program, active transportation, bridge investment. In addition to bridge investment, also significant portion of funding for culverts, removal, replacement, restoration, and then a strengthening mobility and revolutionizing transportation. This is kind of the smart, along the lines of like the smart mobility assessment that we did of identifying emerging technologies to incorporate at $100 million annually. So a lot of opportunities, and we'll continue to kind of bring what we hear and identify, opportunities that you all can leverage some of these formula programs as well as the new discretionary grant programs where we'd be competing, at the federal level with other jurisdictions around the country.
I have a question for the federal folks about electric vehicles. I'm told by the news that GM is planning on being entirely electric by, I think, 2035, if I'm not mistaken, and Ford has already started that process. And soon all the other auto manufacturers are going to be following suit in pretty short order if they haven't already. dictates that they can't switch from, and I'm gonna use phones, from a USB charging cord to a FireWire or something, do they, is there something that requires that the charging technology, if you will, is interface, friendly, with one another, so that you don't have one brand say, oh, we've got the latest and greatest and best,
Yeah.
we want this, but all these charging facilities that we're spending all this infrastructure money on don't work anymore because we don't have the right plug interface.
You know, I don't honestly know if we have anything at the federal level. We do have a joint program office with a few different U.S. DOT modal administrations that focuses on working with the private sector on that sort of consistency that with our infrastructure, especially in terms of, like I said, ITS, communication, infrastructure to vehicle communication, and vehicle to vehicle communication, and the standards associated with that. So I see some parallels there, but I doubt there's anything in the law that would sort of choose a technology or choose a type. Maybe we'll put it in regulation. I don't know. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I can imagine that if we spend all this money and then one of them comes up with something different, we've all got to swap it. I mean, at some point, technology is going to improve and everybody's going to want to swap for that. But I just don't want it to become the same thing in the phone industry is right now, where it's all over the place. What kind of charging?
Yeah, I don't know.
Kind of simplistic. I know.
Nah. Yeah.
Yeah, good question.
These funds that are identified here, we saw that bar chart that showed, I don't know, 20% increase in funds that would be available. Is that current $8 or is it simply inflation? If not, we're really not getting shuffling shells on the table. I mean, inflation, particularly construction inflation, is really outstripping regular inflation. We've seen it rise here in the last year. And also, I was going to ask a question about which program or which funds will the potential Amtrak service national to Atlanta?
So to answer your first question, the bar chart, I think, just captures the formula base, so like the guaranteed funding that's coming to the state, whereas these discretionary programs would be, on top of that funding. So you could, go after those and compete at the federal level for that pot of funding. The Amtrak would not be captured in any of those that we talked about, but I think it's safe to say that the Amtrak would be similar to like a discretionary grant program where you're going to be, putting in a proposal for, a connection within Tennessee and then competing with other lines across the country for that pot of funding, since it would be nationwide. I think I can find too the amount for rail. I think Amtrak got something along the lines of like $66 billion in total, but not all of that is for everybody across the country to access. Some of it is just earmarked solely for the Northeast corridor between, New York and Boston and Philly. So I think it's only a portion, of that $66 billion.
Sean, it may be too early, for y'all to calculate or crunch these numbers. I mean, obviously, this is going to somewhat increase the apportionment directly to the MPO GNRC. Have you gotten into those numbers yet, or got an idea of what that annual number or annual increase is going to be?
I think I don't think we've crunched the numbers yet, but I think if we just go off of percentages, like if we've got an additional 25% statewide, then 25% on our 25 million, as it trickles down is like a safe assumption.
Okay, good.
Andy, I'll also add, we've got with the census designating new urbanized areas and potentially a new TMA or two new TMAs, we might have just sort of more divvying up of the pie, I guess. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, very good point.
But the hope is to have information about this newly available funding to incorporate into our TIP update process as well.
Okay. Any other questions for Sean or staff? Okay. Sean, has that got your,
Yeah, well said.
okay, excellent. All right, before we adjourn, is there any other business to bring before the body? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Please leave your name tag